there is a direction of travel when it comes to drones, and it's undeniable. We are moving in that direction. We are moving to small, dispersed, multiple, lethal mass, if you like. That is inevitable. That's an inevitability based on possible tasks, possible threats, the environment we're going to operate in, and frankly, money. The day of the sort of 2 billion, 3 billion pound warship is is starting to look a little bit numbered. Obviously, we had the aircraft carriers; they're a bit of an exception, but the general direction of travel to uncrewed, small, dispersible assets is undeniable. So this recent trial, I think, is a really important part of that direction of travel. We have to get better at building these things quickly, whether that's disposable or attritable. Those are the sort of two lower levels of drone work. I think that's really important. But, and this is a big but, you have to come back to what do you think these things are going to be used for? And it is quite difficult in the maritime environment where you're generally dealing in distances of thousands of miles. It's quite hard to envisage what very small printable drones are actually to be used for. If you use them in the example that they're being used for in the trial, which is to cause havoc in someone else's harbor, great. But how are you getting them there? What is launching them and recovering them, and what range is that, and therefore how vulnerable is that? So as ever with warfare, it's everything's a trade-off. There's no simple answer, or otherwise we would have got there. And as I said at the start, this is the direction of travel, but you do have to keep asking yourself, but what's it for? Well, let me just challenge the way navies traditionally operate, because you can come up with sort of two different, quite different models there. One of them is the task group model, where you have the high value unit at the center of that, whether that's an aircraft carrier or a tanker, whatever it is, the thing you need to protect in order to conduct your missions. So you put rings around it. You have layered defense, with destroyers forming an air defense ring and frigates forming an anti-submarine ring. Now, in this case, this is the principle of layered defense, and it's fundamental. And as a little sort of an aside to that, is what the Russians have been failing to do in the Black Sea, which is one of the things that's made them so vulnerable to the Ukrainian surface drones. But back to our model, we would have a task group with these rings. Now, if you can provide another ring outside of that, of lots of dispersed, uncrewed assets that are hunting submarines and missiles and can shoot down drones and aircraft, then that's a really good use of uncrewed vessels. They're not going to be as small as the ones that we saw in the video, because they're good for a sea state. In fact, even in the flat calm of the harbour, you could see them chopping around a wee bit. You put them in a sea state 4 in the Irish Sea, and they're going to be swamped very, very quickly. So size, is always the trade-off here. And eventually you make them so capable, they become quite expensive, and you've lost the point of the uncrewed part. Anyway, I digress. Option one, model one, is the task group one, where uncrewed stuff has real utility. The other way navies operate is alone and unafraid. Now, I spent most of my career at sea operating as a singleton, quite often very close to the threat, whether that was in the Gulf at 12.1 miles from Iran and they would rush you. You're on your own. You come to the fight with what you've got. Likewise, HMS Diamond, a more sort of recent example, in the Red Sea, protecting against the Houthis. They weren't in a task group. They were in an organization, and they were discussing their orders and positioning from the US, but they weren't in that sort of range ring. Now, at that point, alone and unafraid, then you might have also some utility for the much smaller vessels. You might want to put one ahead to do some, to check that it's clear of threats. But it always comes down to range versus size versus cost, and therefore where is the balance of utility of whatever it is you're building here. With the Ukrainian battle on land and at sea, you do have to be slightly careful what lessons you learn from it. They're launching from home command. They're launching these Magura V5 drones from a well-defended and well-established home base, because they can do that. These things have got a range of 500 miles plus or minus. The Black Sea is only about 700 miles wide, so they can cover an awful lot of it from home plate, which gives them a tremendous advantage. And then you put in the fact that the Russians are not really putting in place the layered defense that you would expect. I mean, even recently we saw one of these things steaming around one of the Russian ports almost with impunity. There was some patrol boat sort of shooting at it really badly, and then it hit the oil terminal. So there's a lot missing. So again, yeah, there are lots and lots of lessons to be learned from the Black Sea. We just need to be very careful which ones, because I come back to my point that I made before. If you're not doing it from a friendly port because it's not available, which is quite often the point of a blue water navy, where are you launching them from, and at what range, and therefore how vulnerable is that unit to counterattack? So yeah, lots of lessons to be learned from Ukraine, but we need to make sure we learn the right ones, not the ones that are presented as a kind of sexy success in the press. If you track warfare, you've seen this cat and mouse from almost every technology over centuries. You know, something comes along and everyone goes, okay, well that's the end of cavalry. It's actually that's a bad example because there were because that actually was the end of cavalry, but it's quite unusual. It's quite unusual in my experience for a new technology to come along that just utterly changes the landscape. Everyone says hypersonic missiles have. They really haven't. You know, we were defending against high-end ballistic missiles 30 years ago, learning how to do that, how to position the ship. And hypersonics, it's the same problem, just time compressed. So it's cat and mouse. Same with drones. The offensive capability will advance. The defensive capability will catch up as it is now. It appears to be with microwave technology. Lasers, I think, I'm less I'm less comfortable with lasers as a directed energy weapons as a solution to shooting down drones. I just think the mechanics of getting a laser that accurate and the ranges will always be very, very short. This will be a point defense weapon system. So nevertheless, this cat and mouse exists. So will drones go away as quickly as they've come along? I doubt it. I doubt it. It's just part of this sort of cat and mouse, and therefore, back, this is why we need to innovate. This is why exercises like this NATO one are so important. On the one hand, I'm saying, what do you use them for? And partly what you use them for is the as the American colonel says in the video, fail fast and learn from it, and then progress. So back to the cat and mouse of offense versus defense. Let's take my last job at sea, where I spent a year in the Gulf as the anti-submarine lead for two US carrier strike groups. And then my second year, where I was up in the high north as part of the spider's web of ASW anti-Russian anti-submarine capability, intercepting their out-of-area deployers as they sat above our critical undersea infrastructure. So two very different roles, two consecutive years, but two very different roles. In both of those, some sort of uncrewed uh, system would have been very, very useful. When I was sitting near, with a 100,000-ton US nuclear aircraft carrier, I had a helicopter, the Merlin helicopter, with a dipping sonar, which in terms of anti-submarine capability is almost second to none. And it absolutely frightens the life out of our submariners, and they'll admit it, in public, and they don't admit fear very often. But that thing can only go up for a couple of hours a day, maybe three, and then you got to rest the crew, and then you got to maintain the aircraft. So there'll be a day a week, and so on and so on. You can, if you can do something similar, um, and have a link that's so good back to your ship, your aircrew can essentially operate as if they were airborne. Bingo, you've now got sustainability around your carrier strike group. And same with surface drones. A surface drone with a variable depth sonar making a noise. It might not even be very subtle. It might just be making a noise, but you're creating all sorts of problems at that point for the adversary submariner. So yeah, in that role would have been very useful. In the high north, um, perhaps less useful, partly because the weather up there is just, absolutely savage. You're constantly operating on the edge of what you can physically deploy your equipment in. And that's in a, 6,000-ton frigate. So can you launch, are you in limits to launch the helicopter? Are you in limits to launch the sonar? At that point, you still need the submariner who's hiding away from the surface weather in the game. You still need the P8 airborne. So there's that whole spider's web. The idea of me having something that I could put in the water to as part of the package would have been very attractive. course, I had it from the P8, I had it from the helicopter anyway. The idea of me being able to personally operate something from that ship to do so as a force multiplier would have been very, very attractive. But you do come down to the brutal reality of life at sea, which I think when you look at these things operating in harbor and you imagine it, you don't see it that way. You don't imagine a ship where it's basically hard to walk around in because it's moving around so much. And then try and conceive you've got a mission bay and you've got some heavy stuff in there with a crane. How are you putting that in the sea, and then how are you getting it back again at the end without damaging something? So yeah, there's a reality to operations in the very high north, that would have to be confronted by this, and those principal boats are not it. But there are options, and there will be more going forward.